The air was thick with anticipation, like the calm before a storm. Rose Victor stood in front of the grand mirror, adjusting the intricate lace veil that cascaded down the back of her wedding gown. The hall was already filled with the soft hum of voices, the music playing faintly in the background. The family was gathered for the grand event, but none of it felt real to her. None of it felt like a celebration. This wasn't her choice. Her wedding to Anne Rain Peters wasn't a union born of love or even desire. It was a marriage of necessity. A deal struck between two families whose rivalry had plagued the streets of Lagos for decades. Rose had grown up hearing the whispered names of the Peters family, their dealings with the underworld well known. Her father, Don Victor, had never spoken of them with kindness. But now, the unthinkable had happened. Rose, the beloved daughter of the Victor family, was about to be married off to Anne Rain Peters, the ruthless heir to the Peters crime syndicate. She took a deep breath as her father entered the room, his presence commanding and imposing, as always. He was dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, his dark eyes as cold and unreadable as the marble statues that lined the family estate. "Rose," he said, his voice steady, devoid of warmth. "It's time." Rose turned to face him, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt a lump in her throat, but she refused to let him see her weakness. "Father," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Do you truly believe this will end the bloodshed?" Her father's expression didn't change, though there was a flicker of something, regret, perhaps. "This is for the future of our family. You are a pawn, Rose, but you're not the only one. Do your part, and the war will cease." Rose felt the weight of his words like a stone sinking in her stomach. A pawn. She wasn't just any bride. She was the bargaining chip in a war that had been fought for generations, and her family had decided that peace would only come at the cost of her freedom. Without another word, her father took her arm and led her to the entrance of the grand hall. The aisle was a sea of faces, all staring at her with a mixture of curiosity and expectation. She could feel their eyes like daggers, the whispers of her forced marriage swirling in the air. There was nothing romantic about this. No soft music, no fairy tale moment, just cold, calculating eyes and the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. As she walked down the aisle, her heart thudded in her chest, each step heavier than the last. The soft sound of her heels clicking against the marble floor echoed, filling the vast hall. The sun streamed in through the tall, arched windows, casting long shadows across the stone floor. Her gaze never once wavered from the altar where Anne Rain stood. He was tall, his broad shoulders filling out the tailored black suit he wore, his posture impeccable, his jaw set in a firm, unyielding line. Anne Rain Peters was a man of power, but there was something about his presence that made him seem untouchable, a force of nature that bent to no one. Rose had seen him only in passing before today, but she knew the stories. He was known for his ruthlessness, his coldness. He had inherited the leadership of the Peters family after his father's untimely death, and he had shown no signs of wavering in the role. He was feared and admired in equal measure, and his cold, calculating eyes never seemed to soften, never seemed to show anything but control. As Rose reached the altar, she felt a shiver run down her spine. Anne Rain turned his head slightly, his gaze meeting hers for the first time. It was a look that didn't give anything away, just a steady, unwavering stare. There was nothing in his eyes, nothing to suggest that he saw her as anything more than the woman who would become his wife by obligation. The priest's voice broke through the silence, asking for the vows. Rose's heart raced as she gazed at Anne Rain, the man she would be bound to for the rest of her life. His face was hard, like stone, but she could see the faintest glimmer of something behind his eyes, a flicker of emotion, maybe, but it was gone before she could name it. "I, Anne Rain Peters, take you, Rose Victor, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his voice steady, devoid of feeling. Rose swallowed hard, her throat dry. She had no choice but to follow suit. "I, Rose Victor, take you, Anne Rain Peters, to be my lawfully wedded husband." The words felt foreign on her tongue, heavy with the weight of obligation. The priest pronounced them husband and wife, and as they turned to face the guests, the applause began. It was a loud, reverberating sound that filled the hall, but it didn't reach her heart. She felt numb, her body moving on autopilot. This was her life now. A life she had never asked for. Anrain reached out and took her hand, his grip firm and commanding. There was no warmth in his touch, no tenderness, just a cold, calculated strength. He led her down the aisle, the guests still clapping, and Rose felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on her. They were all watching her, judging her. And for what? A marriage she never wanted, to a man she didn't know. Her father met them at the end of the aisle, a satisfied smile on his face. "It's done," he said, his voice low. "Now, we can finally have peace." Rose forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She didn't know what her future held, but she knew it would not be a future filled with love. Anrain Peters had made sure of that. As she left the grand hall, her thoughts swirled in a whirlwind of confusion. What had she just agreed to? Was this truly her destiny? Was this the life she would live forever? But as she stepped into the sleek black car waiting for them outside, Andrain's cold gaze met hers one last time. This was just the beginning. A beginning that felt like the end of everything she had ever known. The night stretched out before Rose, heavy with the weight of unspoken words. The wedding had been hours ago, but her mind was still reeling. The lavish reception had faded into the background, a blur of smiles and polite conversations. She had excused herself early, needing to retreat to the privacy of her new home, the estate perched high above the Nigerian coast, where the rhythmic crash of waves could almost drown out her thoughts. Rose stepped into the honeymoon suite, the door clicking softly behind her. The room was a world of contrasts, rich, opulent furnishings lined with gold accents, soft silk curtains swaying gently in the breeze from the open balcony. Yet, there was something about it that felt wrong, as though it belonged to someone else. Her eyes drifted to the figure standing near the massive window, the silhouette of Anrain Peters against the dim, evening sky. He had changed into a black silk robe, his back to her, eyes fixed on the view outside. The moonlight glinted off the ocean, casting a silver hue across his sharp features. He looked almost ethereal, yet his presence was as cold as ever. Rose took a tentative step forward, unsure of what to say or do. The weight of the day, the vows, the ceremony, felt like a heavy cloak around her shoulders. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but there was nowhere to hide. This was her life now, bound to a man who barely looked at her. Their union was supposed to bring peace, but all she felt was a deepening isolation. "Are you cold?" Andrain's voice broke through the stillness, low and measured, but there was something in the way he asked that almost sounded like concern. Rose didn't answer right away. She couldn't bring herself to speak, not when the emotions were so raw. Instead, she shook her head, stepping closer to him. Her eyes studied the back of his head, tracing the way his black hair fell across his collar. He was a man who wore power like a second skin, and yet, in the stillness of the room, she couldn't help but wonder if he ever felt anything else, anything human. Anrain didn't turn to face her immediately. The silence stretched between them, a heavy chasm that neither seemed willing to cross. After a few moments, he spoke again, but this time his voice was quieter, almost softer. "I didn't choose this marriage," he said, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. "But we are bound by it now." His words struck a chord within her. Rose wasn't the only one trapped in this arrangement. She had assumed that he was as indifferent as he appeared, but the vulnerability in his tone caught her off guard. She didn't respond right away, unsure of what to make of it. Anrain turned then, his gaze meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. His eyes were hard, unreadable, but there was something there, something beneath the surface that she couldn't name. The silence hung heavy between them again, but it wasn't as suffocating as before. Rose could feel it, the pull, the undercurrent of something unsaid, something that stirred deep within her chest. "I didn't ask for this," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. The words slipped out before she could stop them. But I have no choice. Rain took a step closer, his expression softening ever so slightly. His eyes darkened as if considering her words carefully. For the first time since the wedding, she saw a hint of something in his face, something that was not cold, not calculating. Was it regret? Or was it something else? We don't always have a choice, he murmured, his voice almost like a caress, though his face remained stoic. But we make the best of what we are given. Rose felt a tightness in her chest as his words lingered in the air. She knew that he wasn't just talking about their marriage. This was the life they had both been born into, the world of power, control, and the dangerous games that came with it. But even in the midst of that, she couldn't help but wonder if there could be more. He took a step toward her, so close now that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Her breath quickened, but she didn't step back. She wasn't sure why she felt drawn to him, why his presence affected her so deeply when everything about this marriage felt like a trap. He reached out, his hand hovering near her cheek before brushing away a stray lock of hair that had fallen over her face. The simple touch, gentle, almost hesitant, sent a shock through her. It was the first time he had ever touched her outside of the wedding ceremony, and the unexpected tenderness of it made her pulse race. For a brief moment, Rose let herself feel it, the warmth that flickered in her chest, the way her heart seemed to speed up. Their gazes locked, and she could feel the tension building between them, thick and undeniable. Rain was close enough now that she could smell the faint scent of his cologne, a rich, masculine fragrance that made her head spin. His lips parted as if to say something, but the words never came. Instead, he seemed to study her, his eyes intense, as if trying to figure out a puzzle that had no easy answer. And then, just like that, the moment was gone. He withdrew his hand, stepping back as if to reclaim the distance between them. But Rose could still feel the heat of his touch on her skin, still feel the lingering connection that had sparked between them. Her heart was racing, and she couldn't understand why. Rest, Rain said, his voice firm again, his cold mask back in place. We have a long journey ahead of us. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the balcony, leaving Rose standing there in the center of the room, her heart still racing. She didn't know what was happening between them, didn't understand what this strange connection was. But she couldn't deny it. There was something between them. Something neither of them could ignore. Days passed, and the once silent, distant house began to feel like a home that Rose didn't fully recognize. Each day, Rain seemed more distant than the last, buried in meetings, phone calls, and negotiations that Rose couldn't understand. The Mafia world he had inherited seemed to consume him, and she felt like a bystander in her own life. Yet, there was a strange pull toward him, an undeniable attraction that lingered in the air between them, unspoken but potent. She spent her days wandering the large estate, walking through the lush gardens, sitting by the pool, and looking out at the vast expanse of the ocean that stretched out before her. The sea had always been a symbol of freedom to her, a reminder of a life she could have lived, far from the tangled webs of crime and power that now held her captive. But despite her wandering thoughts, it was always Andrain's presence that occupied her mind. He was a man of few words, but when he did speak, his voice held an intensity that sent shivers down her spine. The way he looked at her, with those piercing eyes, made her feel like she was the only person in the world, if only for a moment. One evening, after dinner, Rose found herself sitting alone in the grand sitting room, the soft flicker of candles casting shadows on the walls. She had been waiting for Rain, as she often did, though it was never clear when he would return. She tried to read, but her mind kept wandering, as it often did when he was around. She had never been one for idle thoughts, but there was something about him that consumed her. The sound of the door creaking open broke her thoughts. Rain stepped into the room, his usual sharp suit replaced with casual black trousers and a gray shirt that clung to his broad chest. His hair was tousled, as though he had just come from a long, exhausting day, but even in this state of relaxation, there was a hard edge to him, something unyielding. Rose's heart skipped a beat when he looked in her direction. Their eyes locked, and for a moment, the world outside the room ceased to exist. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft yet penetrating, as though he could sense the restlessness inside her. He leaned against the doorframe, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. It was the first time in days that he had initiated a conversation, and Rose found herself suddenly aware of how close he was, how real he felt in this moment. Rose looked up from her book, a slight frown on her face as she realized just how much she missed the connection. "I'm fine," she said, though she couldn't help but feel the sting of loneliness that had started to creep in. "Just, waiting for you." Andrane's lips curled into a faint smile, though it was more amused than tender. "I'm sure you have other things to do than wait for me." "I don't mind," Rose said quietly, unsure why she was so honest with him. "I'm not sure what else I should be doing. This is, all so new to me." Andrane's expression softened, his usual guarded look slipping for a moment. He crossed the room slowly, his steps purposeful, and sat down beside her. The space between them had always felt vast, but now, it seemed to shrink, as though the distance between them was starting to close. He didn't speak for a moment, and neither did Rose. The silence between them was thick, not. Finally, Andrane broke the silence. "You're not the only one trying to figure this out, Rose," he said, his voice low and steady. "We're in this together, whether we like it or not." She turned to face him, her heart racing as she searched his eyes. There was something there, something real. For the first time, she saw vulnerability behind his hard exterior. He wasn't just the cold, calculating Mafia leader, he was a man who was just as caught in the web as she was. And it happened. In that moment, the world outside the room seemed to fade away. The walls they had built around themselves were crumbling, piece by piece, and neither of them knew how to stop it. "I didn't expect this," Rose whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't expect any of this." Andrane's eyes softened, a fleeting tenderness crossing his features. "Neither did I," he admitted, his voice low and sincere. "But maybe this is what we both need." As they sat together in the silence, the world outside seemed to disappear. There was no Mafia war, no family feud, no obligation that weighed on their shoulders. In this moment, there was only them, Rose and Andrane, two people bound by fate, trying to find their way through a storm of their own making. And for the first time since their wedding, Rose allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a future for them, a future that held more than just duty and obligation. It was early morning when Rose awoke, the first rays of sunlight slipping through the drawn curtains of the bedroom. The grand mansion, nestled on the edge of the cliffs overlooking the ocean, was quiet, still. But as she lay in bed, staring up at the high ceilings, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between her and Andrane. The previous night lingered in her mind, that quiet, intimate moment when their fingers had touched. It had been simple, almost innocent, but something in her chest fluttered at the memory. There had been no promises, no words spoken beyond the surface, but something real had passed between them. A connection. A bond that neither of them had anticipated, but now, as the day began to unfold, Rose couldn't ignore the fact that her life was still bound to the expectations of the Mafia world. Her marriage, though it had begun to feel less like an obligation and more like a potential, was still rooted in politics. Peace between their families, power, and control. It was never just about love. Andrane might have shown a fleeting glimpse of vulnerability, but the walls he built around himself were high and unyielding. Rose pushed herself out of bed, the soft carpet beneath her feet a gentle contrast to the hardness in her heart. She moved toward the window, the view outside breathtaking. The vast expanse of the sea stretched out before her, the waves crashing against the rocks far below. It was beautiful, calming, everything she had wanted for herself when she was younger. A life outside the shadows of her family. A life of freedom. But now, that freedom felt like a distant dream. As she stood there, staring out at the water, she didn't hear the door open. It was only when a voice, low and commanding, broke the silence that she turned. "I thought you would be asleep still," Andrain's voice echoed through the room. His presence was unmistakable, even from behind. He was dressed in his usual sharp black suit, but this time, there was a softness in his eyes that Rose hadn't seen before. He didn't look like the ruthless Mafia boss now. He looked like a man. A man who had something to prove, but didn't know how to. "I couldn't sleep," Rose replied, her voice quiet, almost apologetic. She didn't want to admit how restless she had been. How the thought of him, of their growing connection, kept her awake. She wasn't sure what to say or how to approach him. There was so much she didn't know about him, about this life they were now tied to. Andrain stepped forward, his presence filling the room. There was a hesitation in his movement as if he was unsure of whether to cross the line that had been drawn between them. But he did anyway, walking toward her until he was standing just a few feet away. The space between them was charged. Neither of them spoke for a long moment, as if they were both searching for something that wasn't immediately clear. But then, Andrain spoke again, his voice low but steady. "You're not happy here, are you?" His words hung in the air, heavy with understanding, and something that Rose hadn't expected, concern. She turned to face him, finally meeting his gaze. The intense look in his eyes sent a jolt of recognition through her. He had seen her unease, felt it just as she had. It was strange, almost comforting, that he understood. But the question he posed, was one she hadn't fully allowed herself to confront. "I don't know what to feel," she admitted, her voice quiet but honest. "I thought this was what I was supposed to want. But being here with you, it feels like I'm in a cage." Andrain's jaw tightened, his gaze never wavering from hers. He looked like he was weighing her words, trying to understand her fully. The silence between them grew thick, and Rose could feel the tension in the room, like the air had become dense with unsaid things. "I know," he finally said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "This life, it's not easy. It's not what either of us would have chosen." For a moment, the distance between them closed, and for the first time, Rose saw the man who stood before her, not the Mafia boss, but a man who had been shaped by the same forces that had shaped her, though in different ways. "You didn't choose this either," Rose said softly, her heart aching with the truth of it. She had never asked Andrain about his past, about the life he had been thrust into, but she was starting to understand that they were both prisoners in their own way. His empire had been built on blood, and hers had been built on power and fear. Andrain nodded slowly, his face unreadable. "None of us have a choice," he said, his voice heavy. "But we can choose how we live in it." Rose's heart pounded in her chest as his words sank in. He was right. They could choose. Maybe not the circumstances, but the way they navigated them. The way they faced this future together, or apart. The silence between them stretched once again, but this time, it was different. It was filled with understanding, with the beginning of something neither of them could deny. Andrain reached out slowly, as if testing the waters. It was something real. He said to her, "We don't have to do this alone," he whispered, his breath warmly. As the ocean waves crashed far below them, Rose knew that this was just the beginning. The storm had come, and it would shape them both in ways neither could imagine. The days following their quiet moment had been strange for Rose. She could feel the change in the air, a subtle shift in the atmosphere. It wasn't just the growing connection between her and Andrain, it was the reality of their situation settling deeper within her chest. She was not just married to a man, she was married to an empire, one built on secrets, betrayal, and power. Andrain had been more present these last few days, not physically, he was still consumed with business, but emotionally, there was a shift in the way he looked at her. There was a tenderness to his gestures, a patience she hadn't seen before. For the first time since the wedding, she found herself believing that maybe there could be something between them. Maybe there could be more than just a marriage of convenience, but even as her heart began to soften, her mind kept warning her. Andrain was a man of many faces, what if this tenderness was just another mask? A way to draw her in before the storm hit. She pushed the thought away, unwilling to face the possibility that the man she had started to care for was only playing a dangerous game. Still, she couldn't deny the way her heart fluttered when he spoke to her, the way her pulse quickened every time he was near. She was falling for him, whether she wanted to or not. It was late in the afternoon when the unexpected arrived. A sleek black car pulled into the driveway of their mansion. Rose stood by the window, watching as two men emerged from the car, their expressions hard and determined. She didn't know them, but the way they moved, calm, efficient, made it clear they were not just any visitors. They were here for a reason. And that reason was probably tied to Anne Rain. She had learned not to ask too many questions, but her curiosity and concern for Anne Rain got the best of her. Without thinking, she slipped on a light coat and made her way downstairs. She moved quietly, her heels clicking softly against the polished floors as she approached the front doors. As she stepped outside, she caught sight of Anne Rain standing with the two men, their conversation low but intense. She stopped short, not wanting to intrude, but her instincts told her something was wrong. Andrain's face was tight with tension, his jaw clenched as he spoke to one of the men. "I've told you before," Andrain's voice was firm, his tone cold. "If you want this to end, you'll have to do it my way." The man nodded, his expression unreadable, but there was something about the way he stood that made Rose uneasy. He wasn't just a messenger. He was a threat. She knew she couldn't stay hidden any longer. Anne Rain turned his head, his eyes locking onto hers for the briefest of moments. His face softened slightly when he saw her, but the coldness quickly returned. Rose stepped forward, her steps slow but deliberate. "What's going on, Anne Rain?" Her voice was steady, though the knot in her stomach was tightening. "Who are they?" Anne Rain turned fully to face her, his eyes scanning her face with a look she couldn't quite decipher. "It's nothing you need to worry about," he said, his voice calm but with a sharp edge. "I'll take care of it." Rose wasn't so easily dismissed. She had seen the way Anne Rain had handled the Mafia world from the outside, but standing here now, feeling the tension between them, she realized how much she had underestimated the power and the danger he truly carried. "I'm your wife, Anne Rain," she said, her voice firm. "I have a right to know." He took a step closer to her, his face inches from hers now. "Not everything is yours to know, Rose," he said, his voice low, but there was a flicker of something else, regret. Frustration. "I'm trying to protect you." She flinched, the words stinging more than she had anticipated. She had never asked him to protect her. She had never asked for any of this, and yet here she was, tangled in the web of Mafia politics, fighting against the world she had been thrust into. "Protect me," she whispered, her heart aching at the realization of how little she truly knew about the man she had married. "From what?" "From you." Anne Rain didn't answer, but the look in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. There was no escaping this world. She was already a part of it, and so was he. Their bond, fragile and tenuous as it was forged in a place of power, greed, and violence. But still, despite everything, Rose couldn't turn away from him. There was something inside her, something that refused to let go of the hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way through the darkness together. Andrain's eyes softened slightly, his jaw unclenching. For the first time, Rose saw the man beneath the Mafia leader. "I didn't want this life for you," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm not sure how to give you anything else." Before Rose could respond, one of the men approached, a quick nod signaling the end of their conversation. Anne Rain turned back to him, his face hardening once more. "I'll take care of it. You'll have your answer soon." As the men left, Rose was left standing in the driveway, her mind swirling. She had seen the world she was married into, but now, she saw the danger even more clearly. It was real. It was here. And it wasn't just about family feuds or Mafia wars, it was about survival. She had survived her entire life without truly trusting anyone, but now, standing at the edge of this new life, she wasn't sure she could keep doing it alone. The walls between her and Anne Rain were still high, but for the first time, she wasn't sure they were meant to stay that way. The next few days felt like a storm brewing on the horizon. The uneasy silence between Rose and Anne Rain had stretched longer than either of them expected. Though their physical closeness hadn't changed, there was a subtle distance between them, emotional, invisible yet suffocating. Anne Rain had thrown himself deeper into his dealings. It seemed like he was always on the phone, always meeting with someone, always distant. Rose had tried to reach out, tried to talk, but he was closed off in ways she couldn't understand. The tenderness they had shared seemed like a distant memory, a fleeting moment that had been drowned in the weight of their respective worlds. Yet, despite the growing tension, Rose couldn't help but feel drawn to him. Every time their paths crossed in the mansion, her heart would beat faster, even if just for a moment. There was something about him, something that she couldn't explain. Maybe it was his strength, his quiet intensity, or perhaps it was the way he made her feel, both terrified and alive at the same time. One evening, she decided to confront him, to finally break through the wall that had built itself between them. She had waited long enough, her heart couldn't bear the uncertainty any longer. It was late when she found him in his office, the soft glow of a desk lamp casting shadows across his sharp features. He was leaning over papers, scribbling something on a notepad, completely absorbed in his work. "Are you going to avoid me forever?" Rose's voice cut through the silence, more challenging than she intended. Anne Rain looked up, his eyes momentarily narrowing as if he had been snapped out of his thoughts. His lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, Rose could have sworn she saw a flicker of guilt cross his face before he masked it. "I'm not avoiding you," he said, his voice calm, but the coldness of it stung. "I'm just busy." Rose stepped closer to the desk, her gaze hardening. "Busy? Or are you just afraid to look me in the eye?" The words hung heavy in the air, the truth of them cutting through the tension. Anne Rain stood up slowly, his tall frame casting a long shadow over the room. He didn't immediately answer, and for a few seconds, Rose wasn't sure what to expect. Would he shut her out again? Would he push her away once more? Instead, he sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping slightly, as if the weight of everything had finally caught up with him. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in days, his eyes were not guarded. They were vulnerable. "Rose, this isn't easy," he said quietly, his voice softer now, but still full of an undercurrent of frustration. "You think I want to push you away? I'm trying to protect you. But you don't understand what this world is like. It's not just about us. It's about power. About control. And if we show any weakness, if we make a mistake." "I'm not asking for your protection," Rose interrupted, her voice shaking with frustration and hurt. "I'm not some fragile thing that needs saving, Anne Rain. I'm your wife. I deserve to know what's going on. I deserve more than this." Silence. There was a moment of stillness between them, a crack in the armor that Anne Rain had built so carefully around himself. He took a step toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. His expression softened, though the wariness was still there, lurking in the depths of his gaze. "You deserve more than this life, Rose," he said quietly. "But this is the only one I can give you. If I let you in, if I show you everything, I might lose you. And I can't afford that." Rose's chest tightened at his words. There it was again, the distance. The subtle suggestion that she could never fully be a part of his world. That his love, whatever it was, had boundaries. She didn't know whether to be angry or to break down in tears. She clenched her fists, the frustration boiling over. "I can't live like this, Anne Rain," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I need more than your silence. I need you. I need us." Andrain's eyes flickered with something, emotion, maybe, but he quickly masked it, his face hardening again. He stepped back, breaking the brief closeness they had shared. "You want us, Rose?" he asked, his voice quiet but filled with a quiet challenge. "Then you have to accept everything that comes with it. The danger. The lies." Rose took a deep breath, her heart racing in her chest. "I know what I'm getting into," she said, her voice steady. "I'm not naive. But if I'm going to be a part of this, if we're going to be a part of this, I need to know that there's something real between us. Not just this." The silence stretched between them once more, thick with the weight of everything they hadn't said, everything they had been avoiding. Rain didn't move, didn't speak. But in his eyes, Rose saw it, the flicker of something that could be love, but was buried too deep beneath layers of fear and pride. "I'm not perfect, Rose," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And I don't know how to give you what you want. But I'm willing to try." Those words, simple and raw, broke something open inside Rose. She didn't know if they could ever truly be what she hoped for, but in that moment, with the tension between them finally breaking, she felt something she hadn't in a long time, a glimmer of hope. It had been a few weeks since that night in the office, the night when their confrontation had given way to something softer, more vulnerable. Rose could feel the difference. Rain was not the same man who had walked into her life weeks ago. He had begun to open up, to share more of himself, not just the hard, unyielding leader of the Peters empire, but the man behind the mask, a man who had known pain, loss, and fear. Their conversations had become more frequent, and each one revealed a little more of the truth. Rain spoke of his past, his childhood, his family, his relationship with his father. There were scars in those stories, deep scars that even the coldest heart could not ignore. And with every story he shared, Rose felt her heart open just a little more. He had never asked for love, and she had never expected it. But in these quiet, stolen moments together, Rose began to realize that she had come to care for him deeply, not just for the man he had become in front of her, but for the man he was underneath it all. Rain's gestures had grown gentler, his presence less overwhelming. When they were together, he no longer carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. Instead, he allowed himself to be with her, just her, without the constant reminders of his power and responsibility. One evening, after a particularly meaningful conversation about his late mother, Rain took Rose's hand in his and simply said, "I didn't think this would happen. Us. But I'm glad it did." Rose's heart fluttered at the sincerity in his voice. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future with him, where the complexities of their world didn't have to tear them apart. It wasn't long after that night when Rose began to feel the first signs. She had been feeling strange, tired, nauseous, and not quite herself. At first, she brushed it off. Stress had a way of doing that to a person. But when the sickness didn't subside, when the late-night cravings became undeniable, she knew. The truth settled in her chest with a mixture of shock, fear, and an overwhelming sense of joy. She was pregnant. It was an unexpected turn, but somehow, in that moment, it felt right. She had grown closer to Rain than she had ever expected. Their bond, built on understanding and emotional vulnerability, had led them here. She could already imagine the life they would create, one filled with love, if they could navigate the challenges that lay ahead. But how would Rain react? It was early in the morning when Rose decided to tell him. She had spent the night running through possible scenarios in her mind. Would he be happy? Would he be scared? And as the sun slowly rose, casting a golden glow over the mansion, she knew it was time. She found him in the study, his back turned to her as he looked over some documents. There was a moment of stillness before she spoke, the weight of her words heavy in the air. "Rain," she said softly, walking toward him, "I need to talk to you." He turned around, sensing the change in her tone. His eyes softened as they met hers. "What is it, Rose?" Her heart raced, but she knew there was no turning back. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air, suspended between them. For a moment, Anne Rain didn't speak. He didn't move. But Rose could see the shock in his eyes, the surprise that mirrored her own when she first found out. She held her breath, waiting for him to say something, anything. Andrain's face softened, and he closed the distance between them. "You're pregnant." His voice was low, almost disbelieving, but there was a tenderness there that melted Rose's heart. "Yes," she whispered, "I didn't expect this, Anne Rain. But I'm happy. I think this is what we needed." Anne Rain pecked her forehead gently. "I don't know what the future holds, but I promise you this, Rose. I'll protect you and our child with everything I have." Tears welled in her eyes as she looked up at him. "I know, Anne Rain. I trust you." And in that moment, the world outside seemed to disappear. All the fear, all the doubts that had plagued Rose before faded away. She wasn't just the wife of a Mafia leader anymore. She was the woman who held the key to his heart, and together, they would build something stronger than any empire. The weeks that followed were a blur of new emotions, new fears, and a new sense of purpose. Rose felt the changes in her body, both subtle and undeniable. The pregnancy, while unexpected, had become a source of joy for her, a joy that was growing with each passing day. But the joy was tempered by the weight of their world. Andrain's world. She couldn't help but feel the tension in the air. There were still many things unsaid between them, things neither of them had fully addressed. And while their connection had deepened, the shadows of their past still loomed large, and Rose knew that their love could only withstand so much. The Mafia life was never far, and she had seen firsthand the darkness that came with it. Andrain's fear of losing her, his reluctance to fully embrace their love, still haunted him. She could see it in his eyes, the constant struggle between his responsibilities and his heart. One evening, Rose found herself sitting by the large windows of their private sitting room, her fingers resting on her stomach as she gazed out at the moonlit garden. The soft glow of the moon cast a calming light over everything, and she felt a sense of peace, a fleeting moment of stillness in the storm that was their lives. Anne Rain entered the room quietly, his footsteps soft against the marble floor. He had been more present in the last few weeks, and yet, Rose could sense the weight he carried. His presence was still imposing, but there was a quietness to him now, a gentleness that hadn't been there before. "Are you okay?" Anne Rain asked, his voice soft, though there was a note of concern beneath it. Rose turned to look at him, offering a small smile. "I'm fine. Just thinking." He stepped closer, his gaze shifting to the as he placed a hand on the small of her back. "About what?" "About us," Rose said, her voice quieter now. "About everything that's to come." Anne Rain knelt beside her, his hand gently resting on hers. For a moment, he said nothing, as if giving her the space to speak, to share whatever was on her mind. He had grown more patient with her in the past weeks, more attuned to her needs. The world outside could be filled with violence and chaos, but in these moments, with him, Rose felt the possibility of something better, something pure. "I know you're scared," Rose continued, her voice breaking slightly. "But I need you to trust me, Anne Rain. We're in this together, no matter what. The child, our child, will be the best thing that ever happened to us. We can build a life beyond the empire, beyond everything we've known. But we have to choose it. Together." Andrain's eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, she saw the battle within him. He was torn between the man he had become and the man he wanted to be for her. His love for her was undeniable, but his fear of failure, of losing control, was just as real. "I don't know how to be that man for you," he admitted quietly, his voice filled with raw vulnerability. "I don't know how to be the husband you deserve, the father our child deserves. I've never been taught that." Rose took his hand in hers, her thumb gently brushing the back of his. "I don't need perfection, Anne Rain. I need you. The man who has shown me love when I least expected it. The man who is willing to try, even when everything seems impossible." Andrain's breath hitched slightly as he looked down at their joined hands. There was a tremor in his voice when he spoke again. I've never wanted anything more than to keep you safe. But this world, this life, it doesn't make that easy. Rose's heart ached for him. She knew the pain he carried, the weight of his choices. But she also knew that together, they could navigate it. They could build something different, something of their own, away from the shadows of their families and the legacy they were born into. You don't have to do it alone, Rose whispered, her voice steady. You're not alone in this. We're a team now, and Rain. And I'll fight for us. For you. And Rain looked up at her, his eyes glistening with something close to hope. I'm scared, Rose. But I'll try. For you, and for our child. In that moment, Rose knew that this was the beginning of something beautiful. Not without its challenges, not without its struggles, but real. Their love was not perfect, but it was theirs. And that was enough. The weeks turned into months, and the world around them seemed to shift with each passing day. Rose's pregnancy was progressing, and though the physical changes in her body were evident, it was the emotional journey that was unfolding in both of them that truly defined this time. The bond between Rose and Anne Rain had grown deeper than either had imagined, and with every moment they shared, their connection was solidified. But there was a constant undercurrent of unease, an unspoken fear that neither of them could ignore. Andrain's life, his world, was still riddled with danger. As the heir to the Peters empire, he carried the weight of power on his shoulders, a weight that only grew heavier the more he tried to navigate his own heart. Rose had come to understand that Andrain's love for her was true, but the world he was born into was not one that easily allowed room for vulnerability. There were always threats looming in the background, enemies who wouldn't hesitate to tear apart everything they had built if given the chance. Anne Rain had tried to keep Rose and their growing family shielded from the chaos, but as their child neared birth, the walls he had built around his emotions began to crumble. The reality of what was to come, the life they would have together, the responsibilities that came with parenthood, was a heavy burden, and the closer they got to this new chapter, the more Anne Rain realized how much he still had to change to be the man Rose needed him to be. One evening, as Rose rested on the sofa, her hands gently cradling her growing belly, Anne Rain sat beside her, his eyes thoughtful. The glow of the fireplace flickered across his features, casting a warm light that contrasted with the storm inside his mind. He reached over and took her hand in his. Rose, Anne Rain began, his voice quieter than usual, I know I've been distant. And I know I haven't said much, but I need you to know something. Rose turned her head, meeting his gaze with a mixture of concern and curiosity. She had always been able to read him, to understand the weight he carried, even when he kept it hidden behind a mask. What is it, Anne Rain? I'm scared, he admitted, his voice heavy with emotion. Scared that I won't be enough. That this world we live in will ruin everything we've built. That I won't be the father our child deserves. The husband you deserve. Rose squeezed his hand gently. She had heard his fears before, he had voiced them in different ways, but this raw honesty was different. He was opening himself up to her in a way he never had before, and she couldn't help but feel the love and vulnerability in his words. You are enough, she whispered, her voice steady with conviction. You've always been enough. This world, this life, it doesn't define who you are. You define it. And I'm here, Anne Rain. I'm here for you, for us. His eyes softened, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time in weeks. He leaned forward, his forehead resting gently against hers. But I don't know if I can keep you safe. I don't know if I can protect you from all of this. Rose closed her eyes, the warmth of his breath mingling with her own. You don't have to protect me from everything, she whispered. I'm not afraid, Anne Rain. As long as we're together, I know we'll figure it out. We'll create a future, one that's different from the one we came from. For a moment, the world outside seemed to fade. The Mafia, the threats, the danger, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the two of them, together, in this moment. And as the fire crackled softly in the background, Rain felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The future was uncertain, yes, but with Rose by his side, he knew he would face it head-on. He pulled her close, his arms enveloping her as he kissed the top of her head. "I'll do whatever it takes, Rose. For you. For our family." Rose smiled against his chest, her heart full of a love that was both fierce and tender. "I know you will," she whispered. "I know you will." And in that moment, they both knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. And with their love as the foundation, there was nothing they couldn't overcome. The weeks flew by, and the day of Rose's delivery grew nearer. The mansion, once quiet and filled with tension, had transformed. It was filled with a soft kind of anticipation. Rose's pregnancy had brought a lightness to the air, and Rain, despite the constant weight of his world, seemed to be savoring these moments of peace. The bond between them had grown even deeper as they prepared to welcome their child into the world. Rain had proven to be more attentive than Rose had ever imagined. Every morning, he made sure she was comfortable, bringing her breakfast in bed, and staying close, his eyes softening whenever he looked at her. He had been opening up more, not just to her, but to the possibility of a future beyond the Mafia, something he never thought he would want. Yet, with every tender moment, there was always a shadow lurking. Rain was still haunted by the legacy he carried, the responsibilities of the Peters family that he could never fully escape. His mother's death, his father's decisions, and the weight of being the heir to such a violent empire, it was all too much, and it pulled at him every day. But Rose, ever understanding, remained steadfast. She knew that Andrain's world was one of shadows and secrets, but she refused to let it overshadow their love. She believed in them, believed in the family they were building together, even if they had to forge their path in the face of everything that threatened to tear them apart. One evening, as they sat in the library together, as he read through some documents, she glanced up at him. His brow was furrowed, his eyes scanning the papers, but she could see the exhaustion in the lines of his face. "You've been working too much," Rose said softly, reaching out to him. "You need rest." Rain looked up at her, his gaze softening the moment their eyes met. "I can't rest yet, Rose," he said quietly. "There's too much at stake." Rose sighed, leaning her head back against the armrest. "I know. But the world can wait for just a little while. You're going to be a father soon, Rain. Don't let everything else take that from you." He placed the papers down on the table, finally giving her his full attention. His fingers gently brushed against her arm, sending a wave of warmth through her. "I'm trying, Rose. I'm trying to be everything you need, everything this family needs. But I can't escape this world." "You don't have to escape it, Rain," she replied, her voice steady and full of love. "But you do have to choose what matters. You've already made that choice. We're your family now, and nothing else should matter more than that." His gaze softened even further, and for a moment, he said nothing, as if the weight of her words was finally sinking in. He had been torn for so long, but in that moment, it felt like a wall had cracked, letting in the light of understanding. "I will choose you, Rose," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been afraid of losing everything, of losing control. But I'll fight for this, for us, no matter what." A sense of peace washed over her as she heard those words. Rose had always believed in them, in their love, but hearing him speak it aloud gave her hope. Hope that, together, they could overcome anything, even the forces that had kept them apart for so long. As they sat there in the quiet of the room, Rose felt the reality of their new life beginning to take shape. The child they were about to welcome wasn't just a symbol of their love, it was the symbol of everything they had overcome, everything they would continue to fight for. The love they shared wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was theirs. But just as then, the soft ringing of Andrain's phone interrupted the moment. He hesitated for a moment, his eyes meeting hers as if he already knew it was a call he had been dreading. With a heavy sigh, Rain picked up the phone, his expression hardening as he answered it. Rose felt her heart sink as she watched him. She knew, just as he did, that this was the world he could never fully escape. "Hello." Andrane's voice was cold, businesslike. Rose stood up slowly, her hand instinctively resting on her belly, as if bracing herself for what was to come. She knew that the storm was never far behind. They could try to carve out moments of peace, but there would always be something waiting just beyond the horizon, but all is well. The day Rose had been anticipating for months arrived. The house, once filled with silence, now buzzed with activity. Rose's heart raced, and though Andrane had been doing everything in his power to make her feel comfortable, the reality of what was happening settled heavily on her. She was about to give birth to their child, the child who would shape their future in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Andrane had been a constant presence, his attention focused solely on her. But even in this sacred moment, she could feel the tension in the air. The Mafia world still loomed over them, and while Andrane had promised to protect her and their child, there were always lingering threats. But in this moment, surrounded by warmth, love, and anticipation, those worries felt distant. The time was drawing closer, and Andrane's face reflected both pride and anxiety. He paced the room, his hands constantly smoothing through his hair, trying to maintain the calm that he couldn't quite grasp. Rose could see the weight he carried, the constant battle between the man he wanted to be for her and the role he was born into. "It's almost time," Rose said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed, her hand resting on her stomach. She could feel the baby moving, kicking gently, as if eager to enter the world. Andrane stopped pacing, walking over to her, his steps measured and deliberate. He knelt in front of her, taking her hand in his. His eyes softened as he looked at her, and for a moment, the tension between them vanished. All that mattered was the life they were about to bring into the world. "You're incredible," Andrane whispered, his voice filled with awe. "I've seen you go through so much, and still, here you are, ready to bring our child into the world." Rose smiled, her heart full. "And you've been by my side the whole time, Andrane. I couldn't have done this without you." Just as she said those words, the first wave of contractions hit, sharp and intense. Rose gasped, squeezing Andrane's hand tighter. The pain was overwhelming, but in it, she felt the power of what was happening, new life, new beginnings, and the culmination of everything they had fought for. "I think it's time," she breathed, her voice strained. Andrane immediately stood, his hands shaking but determined. "Stay with me, Rose. You're strong. You've got this." For hours, the labor intensified, but through each wave of pain, Rose held on to Andrane's words, his steady presence, and the vision of the life they would have. Every contraction reminded her of the strength they both possessed, the love they shared, and the family they were about to become. Andrane never left her side. He held her hand, whispered words of encouragement, and did everything he could to ease her through the pain. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a cry filled the room, the most beautiful sound Rose had ever heard. She looked at Andrane, tears in her eyes, and smiled as she held their newborn child in her arms. For the first time. "We did it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Andrane, overwhelmed with love, pecked her forehead gently. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with reverence. "This is our legacy, Rose. Our family." As Rose gazed down at their child, a wave of peace washed over her. She had known love before, had known passion and excitement, even fear. But this was different. This was the kind of love that shaped futures. This was a love that could overcome any obstacle, any fear. It was a love built on trust, vulnerability, and the unbreakable bond they had forged over time. But as they sat there, holding their child, the world outside didn't stop. Andrane knew that there would always be challenges, always threats, always the shadows of the past. But he also knew that the life they were beginning to build was one worth fighting for. And as the baby rested peacefully in Rose's arms, Andrane made a silent promise to the life they would raise together. A promise that this child, this family, would be his new legacy. A legacy not of power, not of violence, but of love. Of protection. Of unity. The Mafia, the Empire, those things no longer mattered. What mattered now was the family he and Rose had created, and the future they would shape together. For the first time in his life, Rain didn't feel weighed down by the past. He felt free. Free to love. Free to protect. Free to be the father and husband he had always wanted to be. "I'll always be here," Rain whispered to Rose, his hand resting gently on her shoulder as they both looked down at their newborn child. "I'll always protect you both." Rose smiled, her heart full, as she whispered back, "And I'll always love you, Rain." As the night settled around them, the house was calm, the tension gone, replaced by the soft sound of their baby's breathing. They had weathered the storm. They had chosen love over fear, and in that moment, they knew that nothing could break them. Together, they had built something beautiful, something that would last. And so, the legacy of Rose and Rain Peters began, not in the darkness of the underworld, but in the light of their love, the promise of a future they would shape with their own hands. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like, share for more.